with the President, would you please state for the record your knowledge as to the Warren Commission's conclusions concerning the number, timing, and direction of the shots?
The Warren Commission conclusions reflected 3 shots being fired, the timing being somewhere between 4.8 and 7.9 seconds, depending on which of the 3 shots missed. They concluded that 3 were fired, only 2 hit. If the first and the third hit, then the total time span would have been approximately 5.6 seconds. If either the first or the third missed, then the time would be conceivably greater, as long as perhaps 7.9 or greater than that.
So, am I correct in summarizing your testimony to be that the Warren Commission's conclusion was that the range, the timing range of the shots was between 4.8 and 7.9 seconds, depending upon which shot missed?
Yes, sir, that's true.
Now, what technical basis did the Warren Commission have for being able to determine the timing of the shots?
They used the Zapruder film, which we're going to see in a little while, as a clock. The film was tested and the camera was tested, and it was found that it ran at an average running speed of 18.3 frames per second. Assuming that all of the shots came from behind, as the Commission did, and using this as a clock, it was determined that this was the most accurate way to reconstruct the assassination.
Fine. Now, you've indicated that the Warren Commission was unable to determine exactly the timing sequence of the shots, and that was because the Warren Commission was unable to conclude which shot actually missed. In the Zapruder film itself, what is the time that elapses from the moment the President is first showing a reaction until the headshot?
The first noticeable reaction on the film occurs at the first frame where he reappears from behind the road sign, which is Zapruder frame number 225. The headshot occurs at 3:13. The difference between the 2 frames would give the time span with which the Warren Commission claimed it happened, which would be, indeed, 5.6 seconds.
And it's on that basis that the Warren Commission said that if either the first shot or the third shot missed, you would add approximately 2.3 seconds to the overall range. Is that correct?
This is correct, because the mechanical minimum operating time for the rifle alleged to be used during the assassination was an absolute minimum of 2.3 seconds to fire a shot, cycle the rifle, that is, pull back the bolt, automatically reinserting another bullet, closing the bolt and pulling the trigger again. Without taking time to aim or anything else, a minimum firing time of 2.3 seconds. That's how they arrived at that figure.
Fine. Now, Mr. Groden, what wounds, to your knowledge, did the Warren Commission attribute to the 2 bullets that hit the occupants of the limousine?
The second of the 2 bullets, which it was felt hit occupants of the limousine, was, of course, the fatal moment when the President's head explodes. The earlier shot striking anyone in the car, according to the Commission, first hit the President in the back, passing through his body, exiting from his chest or the lower part of his neck. The bullet then went on to hit Governor Connolly in the right shoulder, exiting the right side of his chest, entering and exiting his right wrist, and eventually burying itself in his left thigh.
And is this the bullet that has become the source of what has been referred to as the single bullet theory?
Yes, indeed it has.
In other words, 1 bullet passing through both the President and Governor Connolly?
That is correct.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would like to refer to JFK Exhibit F-273. It's been marked as an exhibit, and I would like to have it offered into the record.
Without objection, it will be entered into the record at this point.
And prior to proceeding, Mr. Chairman, I would like to indicate for the record that the young lady sitting to Mr. Groden's left is Mrs. Chris Groden.
The record may still show.
Mr. Groden, examining Exhibit F-273, would you please identify that for the record?
This is a chart depicting the relative positions of the 2 men, Governor Connolly and President Kennedy, at approximately the time where the Warren Commission established, in all probability, the first bullet struck. It was drawn by a Warren Commission critic, and to the best of my knowledge, it is quite accurate.
Now, that chart then is based upon the photographic evidence?
Indeed it is. The Zapruder film, basically, which showed, except for the moment behind the road sign, showed the position of the two men through the entire shooting sequence.
What was the Warren Commission's conclusion as to the time that the first bullet struck President Kennedy?
They concluded, because of a large tree, a live oak tree growing between the window Oswald was alleged to have fired from and the point where the President was in the car during the motorcade route, that no shot would have been fired before frame 210 because the view was obstructed by the tree. It can be seen very clearly from the Zapruder film that by the time the President reemerges from behind the sign at 224 to 225, that indeed he has already been hit and he's responding to the wound in a clutching motion. Therefore, they deduced the first bullet hit between frames 210 and 224.
Now, Mr. Groden, what question about the single bullet theory is raised by this chart?
The basic problem with what the chart represents is the alignment of the two men, both on a horizontal and a vertical plane. If indeed the bullet coming... I'm sorry, did I answer the question?
No, that's fine.
Okay. I was going to suggest the single bullet theory that one bullet went on through both men would have to follow a flight path from that particular window if Oswald was the assassin. Therefore, the bullet coming down, hitting the President in the back, exiting his throat, would have to have made some alteration in its flight path in order to hit Governor Connolly at the angle at which it did indeed strike him. And it would seem that the bullet would have had to make somewhat of a zigzag type of situation. That is, the bullet going through the President, perhaps doing something illogically, as it sounds, stopping in midair or being deflected somewhere along its route, hitting Governor Connolly, going through his body, making a slight right-hand turn to hit him in the right wrist, and then being deflected off the wrist almost 90 degrees to bury itself in his left thigh. This is the single bullet theory, not as presented, but at the time that the shot was supposed to happen, for that entire sequence from 210 to 224, for that bullet to have done this particular amount of damage, it must have taken a similar flight path to what I just described.
So in summary then, are you suggesting that according to this chart, which is based upon the photographic evidence, the relative alignment of the two men in the vehicle was not consistent with the flight path of a single bullet?
It would seem so, yes, sir.
Going beyond this chart, what questions, if any, about the single bullet theory have been raised by the Zapruder film?
Outside of the alignment of the two men, basically it's the timing of the shots, or the reactions of the two men. As mentioned before, when the President reemerges from behind the road sign, he does show definite signs of responding to a shot. Visually, at least, the Zapruder film shows no such evidence where Governor Connolly is concerned.
Can you explain at this time in what way the single bullet theory is relevant to the Warren Commission's conclusion that the President was shot by a single gunman?
Very simply, I would say it's this. If the President were hit between 210 and 224, it was requiring a minimum firing time of 2.3 seconds, or I believe it's 43 frames. That is, if the President were hit between let's say at frame 210, Governor Connolly could not have been hit by a separate bullet until 253. Also, if the President were not hit until 224, we would have to add 43 frames to that, to the point where Governor Connolly would be hit. However, the Governor shows a very marked reaction by frame 237 to 238, which is only 1.8 seconds away, too soon for another shot to have been fired.
Now, to clarify your testimony, I believe you said that if the President had been hit by frame 210, and based upon the 18.3 second standard, or 18.3 frames per second standard, and the fact that the rifle needed 2.3 seconds to be discharged, according to your testimony, you said the governor could not have been hit by a separate bullet until frame 253. But really what you meant, I think, is you couldn't have been hit by a separate bullet fired by the same gunman.
That's correct. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. Assuming a single gunman using that particular weapon, the one attributed to belong to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Now, we are about to view the Zapruder film, and I would like you to explain to the committee whether any special techniques have been applied to this film for the purpose of improving its quality.
Two techniques have been involved. The first that you will see is merely a straight run-through of the film. No special techniques have been involved in this except to color correct it slightly. Right after that, we'll be viewing a special version of the film which has been slowed down, and it has been subjected to a technique called rotoscoping. That is, each frame is shot individually, repositioning the men in the car to eliminate the shakiness of the handheld camera. This is done by using an optical printer, centering the point of interest, in this particular case, the President and Governor Connolly, so that they fill the frame, eliminating all of the excess material on the film, so we can simply follow their movements, their reaction times in relationship to each other and to the car and the surrounding scenery.
Now, as we view this film, what particular points should we be looking for?
In the first run-through, we will be getting a logical feeling for the film. It will be going slower than light speed, so it's easier for anyone viewing it to indeed get the feeling and the visual response of what is on the film. During the second run-through, we will see various aspects of the film in highlighted detail. What we should be looking for is, as the President reemerges from behind the sign, that immediately upon the reemergence, his arms go up in a clutching, protective motion toward his throat. Not actually grabbing his throat, but much of a defensive type of attitude. Then, momentarily after that, there's a slight forward motion and push to the President, downward and forward. And then a few frames after that, we'll see Governor Connolly's right shoulder buckle sharply. His cheeks will puff out, and his hair will become immediately disheveled, all in one frame. And I believe we'll be showing that twice, one after the other, so that if it goes by too quickly the first time, it will be seen again.
Fine. Now, before the film is viewed, Mr. Chairman, I would like to state for the record that this film is copyright. The copyright date is 1967, and the owner of the copyright is LMH Incorporated. I've also been requested to state that the film does show the head wound to the President very vividly, and for this reason, viewing is not advised for persons who would be particularly sensitive to this type of violence. Can we please show the film at this time?
May I also, before we do show it, suggest that the TV cameras that will be filming it allow a black border at the bottom, because a great deal of the action happens at the extreme bottom of the frame, and much of it might be lost.
Thank you, Mr. Groden.
Do you want me to narrate it? Narrate it?
Mr. Groden, was the President's backward motion apparent from the reprint of the frames from the Zapruder film in the Warren Commission report?
No, it wasn't apparent at all from the reprint.
And what is the reason for that, sir?
The reason for that is in Volume 18 of the Warren Commission appendix volumes, on page 70 and 71, the frames, including the headshot and immediately following, are printed. They are labeled top to bottom and then left to right, 313, 314, 315, and 316. This is not, in fact, what we have here. We have 313, 315, 14, then 16. A reversal of the two frames following the shot to the President's head.
Do you know when this reversal was first discovered?
It was discovered some time after the Warren volumes were printed, and it was not an issue for the Warren Commission itself. It was discovered by a critic of the Warren report, and I believe that the comment was made officially, and the answer was that it was an inadvertent reversal of frames. The effect of this reversal of frames, however, would make it appear as though the President was thrown forward for 2 frames after the shot, quite markedly forward, when in fact the reverse was the case.
Mr. Groden, do you know whether there's any photographic evidence that bears upon the Warren Commission's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald fired at the President from the Texas School Book Depository?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Certainly. Is there any photographic evidence that touches upon the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald fired from the President from the School Book Depository building?
There are various photographs taken of the depository at the time of the shooting, just before and just after, some showing the doorway of the depository, others showing the windows, some showing the whole face of the depository. Some of these were among the issues that were raised for the scientific panels of the...
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would like to refer to what has been marked as JFK Exhibit F-121, F-122, and F-123. They are blow-ups of photographs taken by photographers in Dealey Plaza, and I move that they be admitted into the record.
Without objection, they may be entered into the record.
Thank you. Mr. Groden, would you please identify each of these exhibits?
The exhibit on the left is, on the top part of the left photograph, is a motion picture frame, one single frame taken from a film by Robert Hughes, just as the President's car was about to turn off of Houston Street onto Elm. On the bottom is a blow-up of the window, which was supposed to have been the window used by the assassin during the shooting, which will begin within seconds of this frame being taken. The one in the center, the photograph in the center, was taken by a man named Tom Dillard, who's a professional photographer. It is a newspaper photograph, and it shows the entire wall of the depository. This section, which we see here, is somewhat cropped to highlight the window, again the same window that the assassin was supposed to have used. It was taken an estimated 3 seconds after the final shot was fired, but that's probably a loose figure. Within seconds would be a more accurate statement. The final photograph, the one on the right, on the bottom, was a very similar photograph taken by an Army intelligence man by the name of Powell, who was standing diagonally across the corners of Houston and Elm, looking up. He took this photograph somewhere between 30 seconds and several minutes after the assassination. I am not clear as to the actual timing. On the top we see a blow-up of the window in question, which is the easternmost window on the south wall of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository.
Mr. Groden, do any of these exhibits show a clear image of Lee Harvey Oswald in the 6th floor window?
They do not. The photographs as we see them here do not show a clear image of anybody.
For what purpose did you bring these photographs to the attention of the committee?
In the case of the Hughes film on the left, when the film is viewed in motion, it is clearly evident that at least the appearance of movement is within the window which Oswald is said to have used. There is also movement in the next set of windows. I felt that perhaps enhancement of this particular film in relevant frames of this entire sequence might show a comparison indicating movement within both windows, and perhaps if it could be clarified enough or enhanced enough, we might be able to pick out something such as the color of a shirt or clothing. I would not think that it would be clear enough to show anything in the way of features of an individual's face. The one in the middle, the Dillard photograph, could conceivably, since it was taken seconds after the shots were fired, could conceivably, from this angle, show some detail of someone still in that window in what was described as the sniper's nest, if indeed that's what it was. Again, I felt that given scientific analysis, which had not been done before to my knowledge, that if there were an image back there in the shadows, it could be enhanced to the degree of bringing out such an image, and it might show, due to the clarity of this particular photograph, if it was or was not Lee Harvey Oswald. In the final photograph, the one on the right, it had been charged that that shape, that whitish shape that we see in the window, could very well be the face and or head or portion of the body of the assassin. Therefore, I felt that with what was available to the public at that time, which was a very fuzzy black and white still, we might be able to determine whether that shape was or was not an assassin or someone in that window.
To your knowledge, Mr. Groden, did the Warren Commission ever have the opportunity to do any sophisticated photo enhancement work on these materials?
I would say they did not. There is absolutely nothing in the record indicating that they did on these specific photographs, at any rate.
Excuse me just a moment. I understand. Members of the committee having some difficulty understanding you. Since you're here to sort of turn away from your mic, if you pull your mic up closer and try to talk.
Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
All right, do you want me to repeat what I just said, or?
Would you please?
Certainly. The question, would you repeat the question and I'll just...
Certainly. My question was whether the Warren Commission had occasion to conduct any photo enhancement work on these materials.
And my answer to the question was, to the best of my knowledge, they did not, and there's no indication in the records that they ever did.
I would like at this point, Mr. Groden, to turn to another area of Dealey Plaza other than the Texas School Book Depository. I would like to ask you whether there is any photographic evidence that bears upon the Warren Commission's conclusion that there were no other gunmen in Dealey Plaza other than Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay. Do you have a specific exhibit in
Certainly.
mind?
I'll be glad to show you some exhibits. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would like to refer to what have been marked as JFK Exhibits F-126, F-128, F-129, F-155, F-267, and F-274. We are going to be looking at Exhibits F-126 and F-128 right now. However, I ask that all of the exhibits that I just referred to be admitted into the record.
Without objection, they may be entered into the record.
I would also like to indicate for the record that Mr. Groden is going to be asked to discuss a series of exhibits. However, they are only a sample of the photographs that have been made available to this committee. Mr. Groden, would you please identify these two exhibits?
These two exhibits are photographs taken from the same negative. A professional photographer for the Associated Press, James Alkins, took a series of 5 photographs, numbered 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. There were 7 photographs, I believe. This is negative number 6, or the 5th in the sequence. On the photograph, we see the entire photograph, including the sprocket holes of the film and the borders of the entire image. And on the right, we see an extreme blow-up of an area that includes the fire escape on what at the time was known as the Dallas Textile Building, and it shows a fire escape, and there is a man sitting on that fire escape. It's a black man with a white shirt and dark trousers, and directly below him is an open window of a broom closet. There is a shape coming out of the bottom of that window diagonally from upper right to bottom left. It's difficult, a little bit farther down, and a little bit to the left, down a little farther. There we go. That's the image. The question had been raised by various critics of the Warren Report. Was this a rifle or some weapon being projected through the window? And one of the reasons for asking this question is the shape does not appear later on in other photographs, and the man who is sitting on the fire escape appears to be in some form of distress in relationship to other photographs which show him sitting on that fire escape just moments earlier.
Thank you. This time I'd like to have the witness make reference to JFK exhibits 129 and 155. Mr. Groden, would you identify these exhibits and then indicate what issues they've posed to the committee's photographic evidence panel?
The photograph on the left is a print from a Polaroid photograph taken by a witness named Mary Moorman. This is the second of two photographs which she took that day. It was taken the moment of the explosion of the president's head, or a fraction of a second after that. In the foreground we see the presidential limousine. Mrs. Kennedy is the lightish area there, and the president is right next to her. In the foreground on the right we see part of the image of the flanking motorcycles. In the background we see the area that has become known as the grassy knoll. On the left at the top of the grassy knoll, over three bystanders, we see the stockade fence on the top of the knoll, which borders a parking lot. And on the left, from the center to the left, we see a little bit more to the right. There we go. From here to the right edge of this particular print, we see a cement retaining wall, which is the front border of a set of steps. The three witnesses in the background, Emmett Hudson and two others that are on the left, are standing on the steps that lead up behind that wall. On the right we see a photograph taken by Philip Willis. It's his fifth photograph, and it was taken at about the time of the first shot. And in the background we see the same information that we see in the other photograph, the Moorman photograph on the left. Of course, here we see more of the limousine and more of Dealey Plaza in general.
Now, specifically, what issue is raised by these photographs?
Behind the corner of that retaining wall, a little bit more to the left, there we go. At this point, on the Moorman photograph, and at the end of the wall in the same position, right there, in the Willis photograph, there is a figure. This figure was standing in line almost to the degree in relationship to the rearward motion of the president's head. The figure is on the grassy knoll, has never been identified, at least to my knowledge, as to the identity of this figure. And after the assassination, there is some testimony in the record as to this figure running away to the west or to the north and being chased by other witnesses. The possibility that this could be a gunman on the grassy knoll is the reason why I raised the issue in the first place. There is somebody there. The question is, who was he and what was he doing there? And I felt that sufficient photo analysis of these and other photographs of the same person on the knoll, and there are some half dozen at least, might give some clue to his identity so he could be questioned in this matter.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to refer to JFK Exhibit F-124 and F-125. Mr. Chairman, I ask that these exhibits be entered into the record.
Without objection, they may be entered into the record.
Before I ask you to discuss these photographs, Mr. Groden, I would like to clarify something. You made reference to one tape-recorded statement made by Miltier and to two other conversations as well. In total, how many of the conversations were tape-recorded, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, only the initial conversation that included the threat was actually tape-recorded. The rest was the testimony or the reports, the FBI or Miami police reports of William Somerset relating to his subsequent meetings with Miltier.
Fine. I would like you now, if you would, to examine these exhibits, identify them rather, and explain how they pertain to Miltier.
As I described before, the photograph on the left, as we view it, is the number 5 negative, or the fourth in the series, taken by James Altkins. It shows, among other things, the fire escape that we saw before in the background on the left, which will indicate, again, it's a cross-reference to the other man. But in the crowds lining the County Records building, which is the white building in the center right there, in the crowd is this man who bears a remarkable resemblance to Joseph Miltier. The photograph on the right, the exhibit on the right, is on the bottom a blow-up of that section of that particular photograph, and on the top is a blow-up of a photograph taken in a photo booth where you go and put in your quarter and get 4 pictures. This is one of those frames, and it shows Miltier.
Mr. Groden, to your knowledge, do you know whether the Warren Commission dealt with this issue?
The Warren Commission received the evidence dealing with Miltier during the closing days of its deliberations. They did not act on the information about Miltier, and the file was put in the National Archives.
Do you know whether the photographs showing the man in the crowd and the photograph of Miltier were ever studied by forensic anthropologists?
To the best of my knowledge, up to this point in time, or until the life of this committee, they had not been so subjected.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like at this time to have the witness examine what have been marked as JFK exhibits F-131, F-173, and F-174. I move that they be introduced into the record.
Without objection, they may be entered into the record at this point.
Mr. Groden, would you please identify these exhibits and explain what issues they raise?
The 4 photographs in the exhibit on the left are 4 of 7 photographs depicting the arrest or detainment of 3 individuals which have become known as, in quotes, the tramps. They were arrested very soon after the assassination behind the depository on a railroad boxcar. They were taken across in front of the depository, diagonally across Elm and Houston toward Maine and the jail. These people have become a tremendous issue in the last couple of years because there's no record of the arrest. They were picked up in relationship to the assassination, but no records were kept of the arrest. There are no official photographs of them. No fingerprints or identifications were ever taken or made. The 2 exhibits, the one in the center and the one on the right, I believe would represent attempts to identify these people. The allegations were made sometime around 1976 that the taller of the 3 tramps could very well be Frank Sturgis of Watergate fame, and that the shorter of the three, the shortest of the three, might be E. Howard Hunt, of Watergate fame. This opinion was certainly not shared by all of the critics, but the issue was put forward, thereby creating the need to try to identify these people, which probably should have been done anyway. It had not been. The man on the left in the center exhibit is Frank Sturgis. The man on the right is the tall tramp. In the photograph on the exhibit on the right, the short tramp is at the top. E. Howard Hunt is on the left. And the man on the bottom is a man named Fred Lee Chrisman, who was another ultra-right winger, a member of the Minutemen.
This committee meeting is adjourned until 9 a.m. Monday morning.
That concludes the third day of public hearings conducted by the House Assassinations Committee on the assassination of President John Kennedy in 1963. The testimony this afternoon came from Vincent Gwynn, who was a professor of chemistry at the University of California at Irvine. Dr. Gwynn's testimony was highly technical in nature, but to summarize it briefly, he talked about neutron activation analysis he had done on fragments that were found in the wrist of Governor Connally, among other bullet fragments, and compared these to the bullet that was found on the stretcher in Parkland Hospital on which Governor Connally was lying after the assassination in November of 1963. He said that it is highly probable that Governor Connally's injuries came from the bullet found on the stretcher, and this would tend to support, although not completely confirmed, tend to support the Warren Commission's single bullet theory. He also said that there was no evidence of a third bullet that caused any harm other than the one bullet that the Warren Commission said had injured both President Kennedy and Governor Connally, and then the fatal bullet wound to President Kennedy's head. With us this afternoon are David Lifton, an author who's criticized the Warren Commission, and Jacob Cohen from Brandeis University, who has often defended the Warren Commission. We have very little time left, but Jerry Cohen, what do you say about Professor Gwynn's testimony?
Well, I think it's in some very small measure historic. We've been waiting for 14 years for some concrete tie between those fragments and that bullet. The critics of the Warren Commission have been demanding the very tests which he conducted. If ever there was a resolution, if ever it is possible to resolve a question of fact in an area of controversy, one hopes this was it. It's been suggested that the bullet which was found on Governor Connally's stretcher was planted there. Now we must have not only the bullet planted there, but fragments planted in the wrist. I think this is very important and very important confirmation.
David, what do you say about this testimony?
I think it's very important that these tests were done. I think it should be noted that they were done because Dr. John Nichols made Dr. Gwynn an expert in Carcano ammunition by getting all these different samples. However, I think it is very important that the House Select Committee have the work double-checked, and not just the spectrography. I'm talking about the statistics and the interpretation, because although spectrography has improved, statistics has not, and this man claims that he sees a pattern in the FBI data that was not seen 10, 14
This is the
years
FBI data,
That's
the
right.
test the FBI conducted.
That's right. He says there's the data.
Ago.
There were 2 bullets, but the FBI didn't know it. Statistics hasn't changed. I'd like to see applied mathematicians go into this report and really give it a good type of cross-examination the way an attorney would. And we've had an expert here testifying, and that's what it rides on. And it is important. It's really important that it was done, but it's important that it be done right. And I'll bet you that the House Select Committee will not do that, because they've got a report which supports their conclusions.
Thank you, David. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. This concludes WETA's live television coverage of the House Assassinations Committee hearings on the death of President John F. Kennedy. The committee has announced plans to continue the hearings throughout the month of September, and National Public Radio will cover them in their entirety. You can listen on many public radio stations. With Jacob Cohen and David Lifton, I'm Sanford Unger in Washington. Good afternoon.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.
This committee meeting is adjourned until 9 a.m. Monday morning.
That concludes the third day of public hearings conducted by the House Assassinations Committee on the assassination of President John Kennedy in 1963. The testimony this afternoon came from Vincent Gwynne, who is a professor of chemistry at the University of California at Irvine. Dr. Gwynne's testimony was highly technical in nature, but to summarize it briefly, he talked about neutron activation analysis he had done on fragments that were found in the wrist of Governor Connally, among other bullet fragments, and compared these to the bullet that was found on the stretcher in Parkland Hospital on which Governor Connally was lying after the assassination in November of 1963. He said that it is highly probable that Governor Connally's injuries came from the bullet found on the stretcher, and this would tend to support, although not completely confirmed, tend to support the Warren Commission's single bullet theory. He also said that there was no evidence of a third bullet that caused any harm other than the one bullet that the Warren Commission said had injured both President Kennedy and Governor Connally, and then the fatal bullet wound to President Kennedy's head. With us this afternoon are David Lifton, an author who's criticized the Warren Commission, and Jacob Cohen from Brandeis University, who has often defended the Warren Commission. We have very little time left, but Jerry Cohen, what do you say about Professor Gwynne's testimony?
Well, I think it's in some very small measure historic. We've been waiting for 14 years for some concrete tie between those fragments and that bullet. The critics of the Warren Commission have been demanding the very tests which he conducted. If ever there was a resolution, if ever it is possible to resolve a question of fact in an area of controversy, one hopes this was it. It's been suggested that the bullet which was found on Governor Connally's stretcher was planted there. Now we must have not only the bullet planted there, but fragments planted in the wrist. I think this is very important and very important confirmation.
David, what do you say about this testimony?
I think it's very important that these tests were done. I think it should be noted that they were done because Dr. John Nichols made Dr. Gwynne an expert in Carcano ammunition by getting all these different samples. However, I think it is very important that the House Select Committee have the work double-checked, and not just the spectrography. I'm talking about the statistics and the interpretation, because although spectrography has improved, statistics has not, and this man claims that he sees a pattern in the FBI data that was not seen 10, 14
This is the
years
FBI data,
That's
the
right.
test the FBI conducted.
That's right. He says there's the
ago.
data. There were 2 bullets, but the FBI didn't know it. Statistics hasn't changed. I'd like to see applied mathematicians go into this report and really give it a good type of cross-examination the way an attorney would. And we had an expert here testifying, and that's what it rides on. And it is important. It's really important that it was done, but it's important that it be done right. And I'll bet you that the House Select Committee will not do that, because they've got a report which supports their conclusions.
Thank you, David. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. This concludes WETA's live television coverage of the House Assassinations Committee hearings on the death of President John F. Kennedy. The committee has announced plans to continue the hearings throughout the month of September, and National Public Radio will cover them in their entirety. You can listen on many public radio stations. With Jacob Cohen and David Lifton, I'm Sanford Unger in Washington. Good afternoon.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.